systems go. Clear for liftoff.
Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy, GS Luke, here with our Round 4 Showdown stream for the Travelers Championship. Going to go through all the info you need to build your Showdown lineups tomorrow. Been going through a weather report, some of the shots gained metrics, and building a player pool. We'll talk strategy, ownership as well, heading into tomorrow's slate. Any sort of player deep dives and any sort of questions you've got for me in the chat as well. So feel free to go ahead and hit me up. But it looks like we got a few of the regulars down in chat already. Shout out to Goku Likes Ross down there too, who always has a one-liner or two for us. Who, yeah, what a birthday present to shoot over par for Scotty Scheffler. We got NYC, nice to have you in the live chat. We got Sites, Joseph there as well. And it played -2 today, so it was playing to a little bit of a birdie fest. But you might want to ask Scotty Scheffler that question. So I'm loving it too. I want to play it myself, Joseph. And like I said, man, if we can get out there in Connecticut, me and you can play. Hit me up about that. That or Philly Cricket Club. I think we have a better chance over that way. Just let me know. But nice to have you guys in the live chat. Like I said, any sort of player deep dives, hit me up with those, and we'll go through this a little bit later on. But hopefully your Saturday's going fantastic. Whether you're watching golf today, out there playing some golf yourself like I was. It's a weekend. Let's take advantage and let's finish this week strong. So today the course average was -2, so played really easy, easiest of the 3 days so far. And Tommy Fleetwood, Henley, Bradley were guys that took advantage. I mean, you had nearly 50s out, nearly sub 60 rounds out there. Russell Henley being the best of which, who got to a 61. And that's what you get when you have no wind around TPC River Highlands. And if we take a look at the AM versus the PM, the later tee times did get the slightly harder side of the draw. And that was because the winds kicked up ever so slightly into like the 8-9 mile an hour range, but they still scored extremely well. In fact, if we take a look at the top end performances of the day, a lot of them were the chalk towards the later half. Now, you had your Pendriths, your Adam Scotts that came out from the earlier side of the pack. So as we mentioned, you always want to have those earlier guys because they're great for leverage, and you can find players that are willing to be aggressive that are teeing off earlier. And that was the exact kind of dynamic that we got. And the reason I point this out is that we have a Sunday Showdown slate, a little bit different with the placement points in play, but the weather looks to slightly favor those morning starters. And the tee times are set up a little bit earlier than the last few days. The first tee time is at 7:55 local time, which is, I believe, 40 minutes to an hour before it was for the last few days. So that's pretty substantial. They're starting around 8 a.m. local time then, which means the first 3, even 4 hours of play are going to be played in pristine conditions. That weather isn't supposed to come through until about 10, 11 a.m. local time, which means that your first 3 groups out. So your Schmid, Maddie, Thomas Dietrich, your Riley Dunlap group, Zane Hoot, Finau, etc. Probably the first, let's say, hour of tee times here could be a hot pocket of slightly better conditions, but it ramps up rather quickly, unlike you had for today. It doesn't start until, or it didn't start until like 12 or even 1 p.m. It's starting about 2 to 3 hours earlier. So I wouldn't expect as drastic a difference between the morning and the afternoon. In reality is, because we're playing Sunday Showdown and placement points are a factor that we have to consider, it's not like you could only play the early morning guys anyway. So I'm still going to have 2 to 3 players starting in the top 5 to top 10, maybe extend that out to the guys that are T14 or better to try and get some of that placement point upside. But in terms of my leverage, some mid-tier guys are always in play. These guys that are T33 don't get enough love when you're looking at the Sunday slate. But from the weather perspective, if we look for the guys that are teeing off very, very early, there could be some added incentive to going to these players that are essentially unowned. And that's the case with the guys that are over par at this stage. Their projections are going to look terrible on paper because they have little to no upside to improve their starting placement points, which are essentially going to be nothing when it's all said and done. However, a guy like a Matty Schmid, who I'm using in my player pool for tomorrow, who happens to be a top 15 birdie or better percentage player on the PGA Tour, if he happens to make 6-7 birdies and get there at a super cheap price tag, I'm going to have him at sub 2% ownership. Hell, might even be sub 1% owned in some contest for tomorrow. So the ownership becomes a really big factor, and that's why this little bit of a weather edge, and I'm going to throw that in quotes, edge, because I don't think it's going to be that massive to begin with, isn't something that we could go all in on. So it's more of a balanced lineup construction, in my opinion, and to give you guys an idea of the ownership, so I'm going to go ahead and bring up the top 5 highest owned players on the slate. It is almost completely correlated to the leaderboard. So this is from my Patreon page, the projection sheet, which I have censored on here because I've got to keep things like my projections and paywall. In my player pool behind the paywall. Sorry, I was getting that mixed up there. But what you can see over here, and what I want to kind of drive home, is that the top 5 in ownership, this is just sorted by that, is quite literally the top 5 on the leaderboard. If Tommy Fleetwood is the highest owned player, this is for large field GPPs. I've got him at a little bit over 42%. Keegan Bradley in seconds, also Russell Henley up there, Jason Day and Brian Harmon. Just to tell you the next few players, it's Wyndham Clark, also Harris English, who's there at -8 as well. It's almost directly correlated to that top 5, top 10. So though you do need to take some of these players, I'll say that of the top 5, I am playing 3 of them in my player pool. You're going to need them in terms of the placement points. But if you're using them, right, it's not who you play, it's how you play them. You just have to know that they're going to be mega chalky, that they're going to be at least like 25%, probably closer to 30, even 50% owned in single entries for these top 3 players. So if you're using 2, God forbid, 3 of these top 5 players, I'd say I want to at most 2 of these guys in a single lineup together. I'd say if you want a third placement point player, which I think is fine, you want to find somebody that is maybe not as highly owned as these top 5. So for example, like if you think Tommy Ladd wins and you want to back him up with either a Keegan or a Russell Henley, or maybe it's a Day or a Harmon that you're using as your next conviction play, I think that's fine, choosing like one of those guys to pair along with him. But if you want a third player to take towards the top, you're starting to get a little bit too chalky if you go 40, 30, and then 25% is your third man in. But if you go 40, 25, and then let's say like 12% ownership or like 10% ownership as your third man in, and instead of somebody starting in the top 5, it's like a T13 or like a T23 that you're mixing in instead, you still have placement point potential. You got to remember, the guys still have to score for Sunday to get there and be an optimal play. It's not like the US Open where there's not going to be low rounds. I know the wins are a little bit higher than what they were for today, but you're still going to see a scoring average well under par, probably around -1 if I had to put my guess on it before seeing the pin locations, which means shooting -4, -5 is necessary if you're going to get to the optimal lineup to begin with. So don't get suckered in too much to playing players that are in the top 5 here. It just as a disclaimer, SHIPIT may have slightly different projections on these individual players, but most of the sites around the industry, and SHIPIT is included on this, are going to set it up in a very similar fashion to this. The ownership is very predictable for Sunday. We know that a lot of people like playing the guys at the top end of the board, and there's a lot of merit to that. But just to be careful when you're pulling that off. You do want to make sure that you're mixing in at least some leverage at other spots in your lineup. So I've got my cat in the background. You guys might see her back there. She loves this. It's literally just a bath towel that I put over there, and she loves laying on it as a bed. And I couldn't be bothered to move her before the live stream because she was soundly asleep, but she's awake now and doesn't seem too bothered by what we're doing over here. So we'll let her do her thing and we'll continue on with the stream. So if you guys have any sort of player deep dives, we'll go through those here in just a minute or so. I do want to say hi to anyone that's just joining us in the live chat. I'm going to hold off on the questions until we get through the shots gains metrics here. And we're going to talk through how to build a player pool. And the shots gain metrics aren't going to be the end all be all. We'll mention a few other things that you might want to incorporate on top of that in terms of finding plays. But we're going to look through the round 3 stats, also some of the stats through the first 3 rounds to give you an idea of exactly how to comb through all of that and use it to your advantage for round 4. So we got Deacon down there. What's going on? Says, good to see you as per usual. You were so close today. Hey, if you're close, that means you're doing a lot of things right. So like you said, let's run it back there. He said, would I play Schmidt in a single entry or is that getting too cute? I don't know if I'd go that far. I like him as more of a GPP play. And that's because the upside for playing somebody like that is the super low ownership. And in single entries, you lose some of the utility of pulling that off because you don't need somebody that's 0.5% owned in a single entry contest. But if you use him, you might be one of two, maybe three guys that use him. And there's utility in that, I suppose. He's essentially unowned, 0% ownership, but it's not needed, I would say. So it's hey, if you love him, you like what you're seeing in the shots gained metrics, I don't want to talk you off of them completely, but for me, it's more of a GPP option. You won't see him in a single entry format for me. Who's higher owned, Scotty or Tommy? I would say Tommy Fleetwood for sure. I don't think Scotty Scheffler is going to be chalky at all. I think you're going to see people really prioritizing the placement points. And Nick, I know you're a part of my Patreon page, so just bring up the spreadsheet. It's not rather close between the two. I've got Tommy Fleetwood at over 40%. It's Scotty Scheffler closer to 20% owned. So yeah. Maybe on like round 2-3 showdown, it would be different. Obviously, Scotty Scheffler is usually the highest owned player, but because he's starting so far back and people place all that emphasis on where a player is starting, you're not going to see him getting nearly as much steam as he normally would. So it's more so your Fleetwoods, your Henleys that are getting steam, Keegan Bradley as well, who's in the 9K range now, that are all higher owned than a Scotty Scheffler. Is it going to be hard for you not to lock Scotty and Denny tomorrow? I love Scotty. I'll be using him in my player pool. He's I would say a decent short game regression candidate when we go through the shot gain metrics that we can go through, but going to be a fun one. What's going on sites? What's going on Sava as well? He said smash the two ball selections for round 3. And yeah, we will be doing that on my prop and betting live stream, Sava. So if you want to stop by my live stream, that's at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time on my YouTube channel. We'll be doing all that sort of stuff for Sunday. So yeah, we smashed them today. It was a lot of fun, and we'll try and do it again for Sunday. And underdog price picks 2 went pretty well as well. So overall, can't complain about Saturday. It you said now you're really locking them. I could see it. I don't think I'm going to lock them, but I'm going to have a healthy amount of Scotty, that's for sure. But let's talk these shots gained metrics. So for round 3, I like to start with the ball striking. That is always our go-to. And number 1 ball striker today was Russell Henley. Number 2, Adam Scott. Adam Scott been on a roll the last few weeks, and it's not even just this round. He's been decently sharp for the entire week. Victor Hovland came into this round number 1 in shots gained approach, backed it up with over 3 shots gained approach today. I've got to say at T14, you guys know I'm a ball striking truther. He is going to be a pretty big part of my exposure once again. And I don't think he's going to be low owned by any means, but at T14, you're talking about maybe above average ownership in that range compared to some of the other players. Not nearly some of the chalk that you're going to see for the guys that are starting inside that top 10. But Matt Fitzpatrick, he has seemingly found something over the last few months. Interesting to see that he gained over 3 strokes ball striking today as well. Akshay Bhatia, I'm real glad that he shot -2. I had a bet for an under 68.5, which was really important for pulling off a full prop slip cash. And he came down to the very end because his ball striking was there. He was setting up birdie look after birdie look from 5 to 10 feet, and he could not buy a putt for his life. So ball striking was great, but look at that short game on the right side. 3 shots gained to the negative. So that was the reason why he didn't have a nuclear low round. Ricky Fowler took advantage of an all-around really good day. He had a spike round, though, so I'm probably not going to try and tail that. Daniel Berger, he had a good ball striking day across both categories. That's kind of been his MO, just has to find a spike putter at some point. Today did gain 0.8 strokes, so it wasn't really a liability. Starting at T33, if you think you can keep that going, could be a potential leverage option to use as maybe not super like big differentiation. I still have him over 5% projected owned in my projections, but he's certainly not the chalk at that portion of the board. Sam Stevens, he started really early, one of the lowest guys on the leaderboard heading into moving day. He made a whole bunch of birdies, and he did it with the ball striking, not so much the putting. In fact, for the round, he lost strokes putting despite making all of those birdies. So I think that's a pretty good sign heading into the final round. Worth noting that a Keegan Bradley had a decent ball striking day. Straka, Shane Lowry, Aubert, and Grazerman as well. And I want to point out these guys in particular here. The Straka, Lowry, Auberts are the world that are way down towards the bottom end of the board. Just know, and I guess I'll just point it out, I'm playing at least two of these three players that I just highlighted, and they have no chance at getting placement points. They're going off early, which might be a slight advantage with the weather, especially Straka. He's one of those first 5 to 10 groups that you have going off of hole number 1. These sort of guys actually hit the ball pretty decently today, and they shot themselves out of it rounds 1 and 2. They don't have that much to play for, but how many times have we seen round 4? The guy who's pretty much in last place going out first just has a nutted -7 round, has that momentum heading into the next week, and then is on everyone's betting cards for the very next golf tournament. So, I mean, that could be a Straka, wouldn't throw it past them. A Shane Lowry with his course history could be that too. Aubert being one of the best birdie or better makers that we have in the field, I think in contention from that perspective as well. The next thing I'd like to look at would be the short game category. So we're going to go to the shots gained putting, and we'll start with the guys that gained a whole bunch of strokes. And it's not a massive red flag with just this alone, but if you only gained your strokes around the green and putting, then that becomes a little bit more of a problem. So for example, a Pendrith was really short game dependent. I mean, he gained 6 strokes in those 2 categories. A Tommy Fleetwood gaining over almost 4 strokes in the short game categories feels a little bit unsustainable. Aaron Rye, about 4 strokes in those 2 categories. And Russell Henley, over 2.5 strokes between the around the green and the putting. Some of them had really good ball striking days. So like a Russell Henley kind of absolves himself of that because he gained over 4 strokes ball striking. But the guys that were just kind of like okay otherwise, you're not going to see a lot of those players in my player pool. And it's because the short game is really hard to keep up for multiple days in a row. You'll see guys kind of buck that trend at times, but the vast majority of the time you see regression to the mean. And it's not just the putting, but also the around the green stats. So we already mentioned Pendrith, but an Eric Cole, Vegas, a Keegan Bradley, Fleetwood, and Tom Kim, all players that were heavily into the green around the green, which is going to be super tough to back up on Sunday. So again, you can't look at it just in a vacuum. You also have to try and incorporate the ball striking stats, round 4 historical, a lot of the other metrics that you're incorporating into your process on top of it. But it's certainly not a great sign when you see somebody that is short game dependent. And on the flip side, maybe somebody that lost a whole bunch of strokes on the greens could be used for a bit of a bounce back. And Matty Schmid's shots gained metrics, they are not the reason why I'm playing them. We'll mention the reason for Matty Schmid in a second. The low ownership has a lot to do with it, but there's also another reason on top of that, which we've already mentioned this week, but we'll get to it. But guys like Sanjay Im, for example, who lost over 3 strokes putting today, and he was pretty decent with the ball striking stats. He was slightly positive in those 2 categories. Like that could be a short game regression candidate, because let's assume he has a slightly better round in those 2 categories and then maybe gain strokes on the greens instead of losing those 3 strokes. That could be a massive improvement from round to round. So, you don't always do it with the guys that were terrible with their ball striking stats, but a Nick Taylor, I mean, he gained strokes between the ball striking and his off the tee, and he lost over 2 strokes putting. Those are the sort of players that you could see me taking as a bounce back candidate. And the around the green, you could say a lot of the same thing about, these guys that were pretty decent ball striking, like an Akshay Bhatia. He also lost 3 strokes between the short game categories. He would be a bounce back candidate. And Ludwig Aubert, he lost almost 3 strokes in the short game categories, yet he was pretty decent with the ball striking as well. Not every single player that I'm pointing out here is going to make it into my player pool. Again, you have to consider the ownership component and whether they're going to be worth taking at those sort of numbers. But if you give me average to below average ownership on one of those players, then for sure you're going to see them in my player pool for tomorrow. So that's the shots gained metrics from round number 3. If we take a look at the entire event, you can also take a look at some of the top end players from that perspective. And I don't use it so much for like my leverage plays, but when I'm trying to find my conviction plays towards the top, I ideally want players that have done it with the ball striking the entire week. So, for example, Tommy Fleetwood has been a damn good ball striker. Russell Henley is number 2 in shots gained ball striking. Actually, I don't even think that's true. I guess of the top end guys, he'd be number 2 in shots gained ball striking. Number 1, Lucas Glover. That's crazy. Victor Hovland, I mentioned, look at that. Number 1 in shots gained approach. Number 2 there. He's starting at T14. I love him a whole lot for tomorrow. But if we're looking at like these top end players, gotta like how Nick Taylor's hitting it. Gotta like how guys like Tommy Fleetwood are hitting it when it comes to the placement point perspective. Russell Henley, etc. And that's how I use a lot of that to my advantage. And if we go back to the top end of this, guys that are short game dependent are, a little bit more of a red flag. And I don't use this as a 100% like guidebook to playing. You gotta, if you watch the golf, you'll be able to take a look at the eye test and use that to your advantage. You can look at round 4 historical on the stone. That's another data point that you can use to parse through some of the top end of the board here. But it is something that I consider for a slate like tomorrow. So just wanted to point that out as well before we go through some of these deep dives. So we're going to go through any specific players that you want me to go through, and any sort of specific strategy questions as well. We can go through that as well. 63 from Tommy losing on approach. That's crazy if true, but let's see. Yeah, he lost a little bit on approach today. Yeah, short game was just nuts. I have a feeling he's going to come back down to earth a little bit. So yeah, that I mean, especially the short game today is the bigger red flag on him, especially when he hasn't won before and he's in contention. So let's deep dive Denny McCarthy, who had himself 2 really good rounds, one of which was today. Also had one round 2, and could have been a lot better today. The short game let him down. Ball striking was up to snuff. But in my player pool, I have him down as a short game regression candidate, and that's why I'm using him. Because, if he's even just a neutral in those 2 categories, he has a -3, maybe a -4 round, let alone if Denny McCarthy goes out and does what he did in round number 2 and gains like 3 or 4 strokes putting. So, yeah, I love myself some Denny McCarthy, and his best round was when it was windy out there, and it's going to be a little bit windier for round number 4. So maybe those things, kind of vibes can get him going. Aubert, a better round 4 player. Yeah, he's going to be essentially unowned as well. So I think that is a plus if you're going to back him in showdown lineups. No placement points, but really good leverage if you're looking to offset chalk elsewhere. Like if you're playing a chalky Brian Harman using that 7K range, it might be nice to have a guy to differentiate with up top. Like he'd be a player that you could do that with. What do I think the chances are of Henley or Keegan winning from here? You have both at each way prices. Yeah, so I've got Henley. I mean, the each ways look pretty great. Just, shoot something like -3, -4. You're going to lock those up if they're top 5 each ways. Chances of winning, I'd say, you've got a fighting chance. A lot of that comes down to Tommy Fleetwood, but he's never won on tour for a reason. He's been in this situation. He's choked, and I really want him to pull through. I think everyone kind of wants him to pull through at this point because it's been so much heartbreak. But there are certain players that when they get into this situation, it is very difficult to punch that ticket. But starting with that sort of a lead is going to give them a little bit of a leg up. We'll see. I think you've got a shot at it for sure. It's I don't know, if he shoots -4, -5, it's going to be really, really tough to pull it off. But if he shoots like -2, -3, which would be like a slightly above average day, but for winning a golf tournament, that's usually not enough, right? Only gaining a stroke or 2 to the field. Then your guy's going to have to shoot -6, -7 to pull it off, which is doable, but it's going to take a really good performance. So they've got a shot, but it all depends on Fleetwood. In Showdown, you always seem to get 1 or 2 guys wrong and smash the other 4. Time to get better. Yeah, it's tough, man, especially if you're playing large field GPPs. If you smash on 4 to single entry, though, you're going to cash a lot more often than you don't. So maybe try and take a look at some smaller contests because, yeah, smashing on 4 players usually pays out quite well. Can't tell me lie to hold on. He's got 2 tough pros and Henley and Keegan on him down. Yeah, man, it's the question that all of us have to ask ourselves. I would say that it's a 50-50 coin flip. Like I could see it going one of 2 ways. He could just do what he's done the first 3 rounds, shoot -4 again, kind of lock this thing up. -5 for sure. I think he wins. He shoots that number. However, it's golf. It's a crazy sport. Winning your first time is hardly ever easy. You'd have to think he's going to have some adversity at some point. Now, he could still win if he faces adversity, but he's going to make it interesting, I'd have to say. Any love for JT? I love him and Scotty Scheffler. I know both were in the final group and faltered today, but that just means they're going to be lower owned for Sunday. So I like those 2 quite a bit. My Adam Scott call was spot on today, even though you didn't get there. He was in your lineup. Hey, you got to get there at some point. But hey, it looks good for Sunday too. So I'm playing him for Sunday. You might want to consider running it back. I know it's hard to have 2 good rounds in a row, but a lot of the things that made him a good play today make him a good play for tomorrow. So I'm running them back at least. Luke, you called the bounce back guys today. I don't want to say all of them, Mark. I called a good amount of them today. I didn't take down the GPP because I just didn't have enough good combinations. I had a lot of really good lineups, but not great lineups where I was hitting on 4 or 5 really good players. And the last guy was just kind of like, okay, like a 30-pointer today was nothing. Like you had to be scoring 50 plus fantasy points to make the optimal lineup today. And I had a lot of lineups where it was like a bunch of 40, 50 pointers in 4 or 5 spots. And then one guy just shot like -1, -2, which isn't even that bad, but not enough on a day like today. So we'll see if we can do it on Sunday, though. And he said, Rory's with Cantlay. That's a must watch. Hey, it'll be a featured group. We know that much. There's a zero chance that they're not going to have a lot of cameras on them. It'll be a lot of fun for sure. And he said, Scotty's going nuclear tomorrow. He is the #1 round 4 scorer that we have on tour. So I'm with you on that for sure. So let's go over to DraftKings now. So in terms of contest selection, it looks exactly the same as the last few days. The big final round finale, so that's the $25 GPP, is $200K in the same sort of payout structure. The signature hole, so the big 555 is also $150K, so no real movement there. The long drive is a little bit bigger than the last few days, and because of that, and it's still only $5K to first, it is slightly less top heavy at a 7th to first place, so I'll be entering that one for sure. You also have a 10K long drive. This one is 15% to first place. That's another favorable payout structure, so you'll probably see me entering both of those $100 single entries. The drive to green is a 6 to first place. It's not as good as some of the other contests we've gone through, but a 6 is better than the usual 4th or 5th to first place, like you see for some GPP. So that one's marginal. It's not as good as it could be, but it's better than most slates, at least in the $5 GPP perspective. But the nutted contests are oftentimes these smaller GPPs, like the $12 Albatross, where it's 10% to first place. You also have the $33 Dogleg, another single entry contest I'd highly recommend entering, where it's 12% to first place. So half the battle when playing DFS is making sure that you're entering the right contest, and then also making sure that you have the right sort of lineup construction for the contest that you're entering. And the SparkNotes version of your lineup construction in general is that the bigger contest, the more leverage that you need. And, the smaller field contests, that would be like your single entries, your cash contests. You don't need as much leverage, because leverage is how you move up on in the contest, move up those leaderboards. When you're only playing against a couple hundred entries, you don't have to have the absolute nuts to take it down. However, when you're playing in the big $5 or $25 GPPs and you've got 10,000 plus other entries you're playing against, you have to have close to the absolute nuts to have any shot of taking down that contest. So, and the other part of it is that when you're playing against all those other entries, you have to have everything go your way to get towards the top. So you might as well take low-owned players. Don't share them with as much of the field where you can, so that when your guys hit, which is hard to do on PGA DFS, this is way tougher than I think a lot of people think when it comes to finding the nuts, especially for a Sunday showdown slate. But when you do, you don't want to be sharing that ownership at all 6 spots. Now, Sunday showdown's a little bit different than rounds 2 and 3, where we have to have a little bit more chalk because of the placement point aspect. But in those larger field GPPs, we got to have 1 to 2 players at least in those lineups where we're taking guys at sub 7%, where we're trying to actively get different to the field. You can hit on your guys up top, the 3 maybe players you're taking starting in the top 15, maybe somebody in the mid tier that pops off close to the top 10. Those 4 players you have to hit on, but those other 2 are where you're really going to win the GPP. The random guy that goes off early that makes the 8-9 birdies and plays unconscious without playing for anything. The mid-tier guy that goes off at 5 to 7% ownership that cracks the slate at a -5, -6 round. That's what actually wins or loses you the GPP, because those core players up top, like the chalky placement point guys, that core of 3 or 4, there's going to be a ton of people that get that core of 3 or 4 players correct. It's those other 2 pieces that are really going to make or break you in the large field GPPs. So when you're in single entries, though, you don't have to be as bold about that. You maybe don't have to have as much leverage in there. That's not to say that you should be playing all chalk at the top end of the board, but you don't have to get as crazy with it. You don't have to leave salary on the table. You don't have to worry as much about duplicating yourself because you're playing against so many other people. But for the sake of this and for the lineup construction segment, we're going to build a lineup for the large field GPP. So we're going to take it to the extreme. We're going to have to make ourselves get a little bit different at some point, just because the lineup construction is slightly harder to pull off, right? If we didn't have to worry about the ownership as much, our life would be pretty easy when putting this lineup together. So for the sake of, showing you that thought process, let's put this in like the big $25 GPP, I would suppose. So up top, we've got to figure out what placement points we want to take. So that's why I sorted this by score, so that we can take a look at the top end of the board and figure that out before we get to our leverage. And I'm going to throw in a Russell Henley. I'm also going to throw in a Brian Harman at $7,700. Those are going to be in that 2 guys starting in the top 5 of the ownership that I'm going to force myself to take no more than 2 starting in that top 5. Then I'm going to drop down here and throw in a Justin Thomas. So he's T14. He still has placement point potential, and he's not going to be as chalky as some of the other guys. So, like I said, especially in the large field GPPs, you want to start thinking about ownership a little bit, even with your placement point guys. And then we're going to take one more player who might be able to crack the top 10 if he has like a really good round. And let's go Adam Scott. I know we mentioned him a little bit before. And now that's 4 players that we've taken already that pretty much are the 4 guys I'm counting on to finish in the top 10. They've got to shoot -4 or better anyways to make it to the optimal lineup. And if they do so, they're probably going to finish top 10 because of where they're starting. So I like where we've started there. But for our last few players, and it's kind of tough because we have $8,400 remaining. So we've got to get our leverage with our last 2 players. A lot of times I'd rather be a little bit more aggressive with my salary. So you know what? Rather than Justin Thomas, we're going to take Scotty Scheffler just so it forces us. Actually, I guess that's even a little bit too aggressive, I guess, with Scotty Scheffler. That put us down to $6,100 remaining. I don't know if we can swing that one. So rather than going with Adam Scott, we're going to go to a slightly more expensive player, with, just so that it puts us in a better spot. So let's go with Cantlay at $9,800. So those are our 4 players starting towards the top end of the board. Now with our last 2 spots, this is where we have to get all of our differentiation. This is where we've got to make sure that we're not going to duplicate ourselves with other lineups, and where we're going to move up the leaderboards and get those crucial leverage points versus the rest of the field. So an example of a leverage piece there, like wouldn't be an Adam Scott. He's going to get some ownership starting in the top 25, but like Abatia, who's just a little bit further down the board, like maybe you could use him for a little bit of leverage. I've got him closer to like 7% projected owned, so he's not unowned, but he's certainly not chalk. And then for your last man in here, you could leave some salary on the table. That's always an option to add in some extra differentiation. But if you rounded this off with like a Gerard, maybe even a Novak, only leaving $100 on the table, you probably get away with that. But if you really want to be safe about it, you take one of these guys that's over par, like a Bez, a Tom Hoagie, Davis Riley. Like a lot of those guys I don't have in my poll because the shots gain metrics are just nasty and I can't get there. But there are players down here that we can get at sub 2-3% ownership to round off this sort of a build. And we still have the placement points in 3-4 spots. Batia is not too crazy of a play at like 7-8% owned. Sure, you might have like one guy down here that's going off early. And you know, the thing about the over par guys is that they have the good conditions. So like maybe a Dietrich, a Riley is that guy that makes 6 or 7 birdies and no bogeys going off in the first few hours of tee times. If you get that guy right, and then this is the core 4 that gets there. And, you know, you're going to have a lot of different combinations of your core 4 up top that you're swapping in and out to try and get the exact combination right. But the part that you don't want to sleep on are these last 2 leverage spots that you're going out there and mixing in. So that's what we've got for the round 4 live stream, guys. Hopefully you feel a little bit more prepared for all of your action tomorrow. Best of luck with everything that you guys are entering. I hope to see a lot of you guys towards the top end of those GPPs. Let's have ourselves a Sunday. Let's finish strong for our main slate exposure as well. Smash the like button if you guys haven't already. Also subscribe to the channel so you guys don't miss any of the content to come. All the rest of the events on the schedule, we're going to have you covered for Showdown and rounds 2 through 4. And then also Hoop and Tambo. I've got the shows on Mondays, Tuesdays. I've got my show we're going to have for Live Before Lock on Wednesdays. You want to be tuned for all of that throughout the schedule. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of it when it drops. But that's all I've got. As I said before, best of luck with everything that you guys are going with. I'll see if there's any last second questions that we need to go with. But a little reminder of that prop and betting live stream. That's going to be at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time on my YouTube channel. So that is GS Luke DFS. You guys can follow that over there. That'll be for all the underdog and prize pick stuff for Sunday. Also all the matchups and 3 balls, 2 balls as well on the sports books. So stop on by for that if you're playing that on top of the fantasy stuff here. Obviously, I like to keep the live stream separate so that you can find the exact content that you're looking for. But it's been a pretty good weekend for the props, multiple profitable days in a row. And the live stream props in particular have been hidden at a really high hit rate at this point. So you won't want to miss out on that. On top of just going over plays, which is always a part of those streams a little bit, it's very process based. We go through all the pin locations, stat averages from the day before, really give you guys a deep dive of the exact conditions that these players are going to be facing. And we go through exactly how to attack the different prop categories. So, you know, for example, projected scoring averages, projected fairway averages, green averages, et cetera, really diving into the weeds so that you have all the research you need to attack any given slate. So make sure to check that out if you guys are betting on any of those sites. And let's see if there's any last second deep dives that we need to do. He said, Scotty killed your lineups today. Dang. Yeah, he was a full fade for me, but yeah, I mean, if you used him at that price tag with that over par, that lineup doesn't have a shot. But don't be just too discouraged about it. I know you said you might be locking him for Sunday. Hey, you have the right mentality about it, right? A lot of people in that situation might full fade somebody after having them screw a lot of their lineups. And we know the flop lag is the thing for a reason. So, hey, commit to it, man. I know you're not scared to pull that sort of thing off. And it might just be what wins you a GPP tomorrow, Nick. But it's all I've got, guys. Best of luck out there with all of your exposure. And to see you guys for all the content next week.